My wife and I went shopping for a new pair of shoes for my son, and I knelt down to see if they were going to fit. And I said to my wife, babe, I don't think these shoes are going to work. They're a little bit too big. And she said, no, they're perfect. He has room to grow. And I thought to myself, don't we all?
All right, guys, welcome back to the Brave Work Room to Grow podcast. I'm so excited to be here with a friend, Kyle Wailes. We're about to dig in on some awesome stuff. We are starting off, you don't know this, you're kicking off the Brave Work Leadership Series. So we want to kind of go through the highs, lows, and habits of leaders.
Yeah.
And so we're going to dig in a little bit, maybe have some fun along the way. So I'm really excited to jump in. For context, those listening, I could talk about your company. I could talk about a lot of things, but I wanted to start here. This is where I thought a lot of my listeners, I already know, like me, they're going to listen to your story. They're going to hear what you've done, what you've accomplished at the ripe young age of 21 years old. And they're going to go, I'm not there. Like I feel intimidated. So I'm confessing, being vulnerable. I feel a level of that. I know our tribe will. And so I wanted to ask you, was there a time in your journey where you look back and you're like, man, I felt insecure. I felt scared. I saw everybody else kind of building things, doing things, growing things.
Man, every day. I mean, that's, I think that's what leadership's all about. It's about, being vulnerable, which encourages others to kind of, follow in your way, right? I think if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand sort of what they're going through and think of the reaction that you want from that interaction. All that starts with vulnerability, at least for me in terms of how I think about it.
That's good.
So every day, I mean,
I love that answer.
Wake up every day and grind,
not
wanting to get left behind.
Yeah. Oh, I totally get that. I was talking to a buddy yesterday out in Michigan, and I was talking to him about our time together, and I was like asking him for advice, and he works with some awesome people. And I was like, hey man, I feel a little insecure having this conversation. I'm gonna be honest with you. And he said something really powerful. He said, you should say that at the top of the interview. You should say that. And he said, here's why. He said, Pedro, do you know the difference between being transparent and being vulnerable? And I was like, no, they feel like the same thing. And he said, transparency is, I'll let you see me, I'll let you hear my story, and here's what's going on. He said, vulnerability is the moment you give a part of yourself to somebody else that they could come back and hurt you with. That's what it means to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'll tell them I feel scared.
I like that. And that's what builds trust too.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we start out all of our sort of leadership offsites. It starts out with kind of, why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing?
That's good.
And I think when people really understand, one, you got to be vulnerable to go to those spaces.
That's right.
But once you've been there, there's a level of trust that you have with your team that other people don't have.
That's right. So let's talk about that for a second. Before I even explain the company, because that seems like the natural place to start, right? Like, let's explain what you do, all that. Before we even do that, talk about the core values of who you guys are. Because I always think it's interesting to let people hear the core values of a company, the things that have shaped those values before we even talk about the work.
Yeah. Man, it's such a good question, because I think that's where it all kind of starts, right? Why are we doing what we're doing in many ways? And so that's really what it's all about, is why are we here? Who are we serving? Is it a doctor? Is it a patient? And there's sort of buzzwords behind that that, probably mean something to us but don't to others in many ways. But that's the essence of it, is the value is you really got to understand why you're doing what you're doing. I think for the mission of the company, but also for driving motivation with our teams, right? It can't be my why. It's got to be, our team members' why, an individual why. And so we really try and get to the heart of that. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. How do we get people to talk about that and drive sort of that culture across the entire company in many ways?
So you started a company. So now we can zoom out. You started a company called Wellvana. Were you an original founder of the company?
I was not the original founder.
Okay.
I got there super early.
Okay.
But the company had been around for a couple of years before I got there.
Okay. So you came in. What was that transition like? So there's an active CEO,
Yep.
kind of on throne.
Yep.
You're, I don't know, getting looked at as like the next guy. What was that period like? What did you experience? What did you feel during that time?
It was tough. I mean, it was a big cultural change for the company. Like I said, had to step in and sort of build trust with the team that was there, while also, showing that we had the capability, the expertise to sort of take it in a new direction at the same time. And so it started with, building relationships with the team that was there, identifying sort of who was the right fit for the next level of where we wanted to go. And then very quickly building the team around that to drive to success. That started with a really deep assessment of, do we have the right talent? And I think when you get to the conclusion that you don't, you've got to make that change.
How do you identify that in your space? Like, how do you go, that guy or that gal is like, that's a team player too we need?
Yeah. I mean, it starts with, at least for me, getting the right team around me. So the right executive leadership team. And part of that is people that I've worked with for a long time, and I've sort of built that trust and seen the capabilities that they have. I think a separate part of it is really understanding the core competencies of what we need in the leadership team, and then going out and getting that. But for me, it really starts with, let's get the right executive leadership team on the bus. And from there, agree on the objectives, the key results that we want to achieve, the mission behind what we want to achieve, why we're doing what we're doing, and allow those leaders to really execute within their teams to deliver on the mission of the overall company.
That's
and
good.
So, I'm not, at least in those early days, spending a lot of time, filling up the entire team. I spend a lot of time filling up the right leaders, and then allowing them to build their teams.
That's really good.
In many ways.
There's a lot of pain in progress. I'm learning this in so many areas of my life, whether it's, I told you I'm doing 75 hard.
Yep.
That's a subtle flex. Guys, I'm doing hard things over 75 days. It is what it is. But, talk about a little bit about the pain of this process of coming in, being the leader, being the CEO. Everybody's looking at you to go like, what's our vision? Where do we go from here? What are our next steps? Like, what's been some of the in your internal world that you've had to navigate the pain of that progress?
Yeah. I mean, leadership's a lonely place, right? It's a famous saying, but it really is true. I joke about it sometimes. If everyone knew what I knew about the company, no one would ever show up to work. But it's so true in many ways, right? Because I see every facet of the company. And because of that, it's critical you got to have the perseverance to be able to stick through that, right? Never get too high when things are going good. Never get too low when things are going bad. But you've got to really find what works for you in that, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So for me, there's been so many times throughout my life, be it sports, be it work, be it whatever it might be, of really hard times, losses, wins. I think it's all those experiences together where you have to figure out what works for you to allow you to stay sort of that even keel, right? In many ways.
Where did that come from? Like in you, where did that, I know for me, like sports was a big part of that for me growing up. Were you around people like this? Like, was your dad this way? Did your parents have an even keel sort of behavior?
I think it's sports, but it's really, it's experience, right? I mean, starting with certainly, parents, friends, family. But I think it's the experience of going through that all together. So, sports is a good example of that where, I was a very highly touted hockey prospect.
Yep.
Ended up in my draft year for the NHL quitting hockey, and so imagine kind of what that was like, right? And the decision and the impact that had on sort of my life at the time, and really not knowing what was going to come next. And so,
what was the driver behind the decision at the time? Was it I see a different path forward?
It's interesting. I look at a lot of the guys that I played with growing up, and there was always a couple where they were better than most of the other guys in the league, but a lot of the guys that weren't at that level and still made it all the way are the ones that didn't really have other options, right? They kind of stuck with it.
Like, this is what I'm going to do.
And had that perseverance. For me, I always had other options. And so when the time got really tough and, I spent a couple of years, in a league called the Ontario Hockey League, where I wasn't playing a ton, playing with, a lot of older players. And instead of having the mentality of just put your head down and work harder, I looked at it as sort of, it was always everyone else's fault, right? As to why I wasn't playing and so I think going through that experience of really moving from it is no one else's fault, put your head down and work harder, and having that experience so many times throughout my entire life, be it sports, starting with that, or sports within college, losses, whether it's games or bigger losses, right, throughout your entire career from a professional perspective within sports. I think you just learn this level of perseverance where, success is never final, failure is never fatal, and just kind of wake up the next day and keep pushing forward.
That's really good.
And it's been the same for work as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that really sort of clicked in me, probably 10, 15 years ago, coming out of school, working in New York and just, having those experiences, but being able to sort of put your head down and work harder is something that has really paid off for me.
That's really good, man. I know our tribe is listening right now and they're like, okay, yeah, I like this guy. I'm connected. I'm curious about your personal habits. Like, what have you done? So we kind of see now a picture of what kind of shaped you. What are some of those like personal day-to-day habits you've had to take on or maybe even level up as a CEO, as a leader? I know for me in my life, I've had to change a lot of things with growth and over time. And a lot of people think, oh, you're the CEO or you're an entrepreneur. They hear these phrases and they're like, so you just get to do whatever you want. And in a lot of ways, I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like my life has gotten more disciplined and more structured than, even some of my friends who kind of get a 9-to-5 clock in, clock out situation, which isn't bad. Some days I envy the 9-to-5. I'm like, man, that sounds great. Just wake up, drink some coffee, go and do a thing. And what have you had to learn how to do to have those habits for yourself to keep driving forward?
Yeah. I mean, just to echo that comment, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I had an eye procedure yesterday. I couldn't see out of my left eye for 5 or 6 hours, but I sat on my computer until 10, 11 last night working. And my
like
wife
Popeye.
was,
You look like Popeye.
Exactly. My wife was giving me a hard time about it. And I said, well, look, if I don't work, nobody else is going to. Right. And so I think, what many people don't realize is it as you move into this role, it comes with a new level of responsibility. I don't think you ever fully appreciate what that feels like until you're in it. And it's not just, the responsibility of, you anymore, waking up and going to work and coming home. It certainly is your family, your kids, your wife. But we've got, 300 team members. It's every one of them. It's all of their families. It's our investors. And by nature, they're investors and their families. And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I think to your point, you've got to have the right behaviors day in and day out that allow you to succeed and not only succeed, but perform at your best. And so for
what
me,
do those look like for you? Give me like an average day. Because we've talked about this a little bit offline.
Yeah, working out is big for me.
Yeah.
I've got to get up early and it goes back to that perseverance, right? Like if I can suffer in a way working out, it makes it hard to really think about anything else. Right? Like if you're on the bike and your legs are on fire and the lactic acid is just killing you and your lungs are burning, and all you're thinking about is getting the end of that minute, right? And when it happens again, get the end of the next minute. And it for me, it has a cleansing effect where it totally clears my head. And then when those problems exist throughout the day, it's kind of like, it's a problem. We'll deal with it. We'll figure it out.
Yep.
And I think that learning what those are for you could be meditation, could be working out.
Yeah. Mine's yoga.
Could be yoga.
It's been yoga lately.
Could be sitting by yourself at the end of the day with a cigar. Like you got to figure out what works for you, and then stick to that sort of repetition and pattern. And I think in this role, you're going to try and you're going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. It's really important to put that process first so that you can perform, at your best sort of day in and day out. And it's not 5 days a week. It's 7 days a week. It's 25 hours a day. It's 8 days a week, right? I mean, it's a full-time commitment to saying no to things.
Yeah.
And saying yes in terms of where you spend your time.
Yeah. How do you define that for you now? Like, giving your yes to things. means what? Giving your no to things. Like, how do you know now pretty instinctively, like when something pops up, you're like, nope. Nope. Do you know? Is it that easy, or do you have to sit and think about it a little bit?
I still struggle with that. It's hard for me to say no, especially to
chocolate cake.
Yeah, chocolate cake. Me too, man. And I would say more so to friends, right? Like socially, it's hard to say no to stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, like I don't get a ton of energy from that, right? I mean, and mostly that's because there's so many hours that goes into the workday.
Yeah.
Certain types of people get a ton of energy from, social events.
Yeah.
I do them, but I don't get energy from that. Right.
Same.
I like doing them.
Yeah.
But I also like having a close group of, friends that have similar experiences where we can talk about those experiences and kind of bounce stuff off each other as well. My wife, on the other hand, gets a ton of energy from all those types of things.
Yeah,
and so
we've got marriage. Yeah.
I think you've got to balance that. You got to have the support of your family to be able to sort of allow you to do what you do every day and have that process. And so the no's, I think, are hard, but it's ensuring that you find the time to make sure that you're sort of showing up your best self every single day.
Yeah. You touched on something that I want to kind of, because I hear it even as a theme. It's like it's a through line in what we're talking about, which is this idea of like self-imposed micro-suffering is the phrase I've learned to call it.
Yeah.
Is like almost every leader I know, they've learned to like, no, I'm not going to wait for situations to cause me to suffer or feel impatient or frustrated or angry. I'm actually going to train my mind and body in little small micro doses of suffering, of sorts, of difficulty, of challenge. And I hear it even in your no. It's like, no, I'm going to say no to those things. Like, and that's a little bit of a micro suffering. It's like, man, that could be fun though. That could be fun. That outing could be fun. It could be great for my wife. Like she gets the hit off of like hanging with people and the buzz. And what does that look like? And I know it's a weird turn, but what does that look like? Is that an important value for you to train into your children as they grow?
Yeah.
Because I know for us, like we're doing things, especially you've had a lot of success. They're growing up in a home where there's a lot of success and there's a lot of like dad's figured stuff out. He's pioneered things. And so my worry with my kids is always like, as much as I want to give them success and give them all these things, there's also this fear in the back of my mind. I'm going to make them soft.
Yeah.
Because what got me here was not easy stuff. It was all the hard things.
Yep.
And you're like, I want a clear path for them to excel and to have more than I had and to start but at the same time, I'm like, but dang it, they need to suffer. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do that? Is that a value you want to pass on to your kids? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah. I think every parent wants to give their kids sort of more opportunity than they had. I think, my parents were certainly no different. My dad lost his dad when he was 8. And he was the oldest of 5 at the time. I mean, just truly an incredible story, and wanted to give his kids a better life than he had. And I think so on and so forth. I want to give my kids more opportunity. What does that mean to me? I think it's about how do we prep them to be whatever they want to be. Kind of whatever that means to them. As I think about, at least for me coming out of school, I didn't really have that luxury, right? It wasn't like I was going to, go start a business. And I think some people would say, well, you don't need a ton of money to be able to do that. You just go do it. And I think looking back on it, that's probably right. But I didn't have that skill set. I didn't have that knowledge.
Yeah.
Didn't have the capital.
Yeah.
And so it's how do we ensure that they're diversified with a skill set, so that whatever they decide to do, whether it's sports or dance or academics or doctor, lawyer, school, work, start a business, whatever that means, ensuring that they're going to be successful at that. And I think part of that is learning how to suffer, right, and learning how to persevere through that. Because if you don't learn that skill, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but you're never going to be good at it.
Yeah.
And so I think, for me, that's where sports are so critical. The winning and losing kind of not making a team and having to try out for another one and making that team, and, winning and losing with that team are critical life lessons.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't like where you're hitting in the lineup, work harder, be better. Right. And then they have to play you where you want to be.
That's right.
And so, those are critical skills for me to push down to my kids. And I think the balance that we all struggle with there is, how do we do that without being, too hard on them?
Yeah. tearing them apart,
making sure they're having fun.
Yeah.
I certainly don't have any good answers for that, but kind of figure it out as we go along.
Yeah. Well, aren't we all
Right.
in the parenting world? I want to talk a little bit about Wellvana, obviously the company, and I love that our tribe is getting to hear you mixed with values, mixed with how you're leading, but also now kind of getting a picture of that in the context of what you guys are doing. You guys are really known as like a disruptor. You were on, so Jamie George, I've known Jamie a long time. Shout out to Jamie. He doesn't listen to this podcast, but you should, Jamie, if you ever do. We love you. So I got to hear you on his podcast. I think it's Thrivalist, right?
Yep.
So good. And one of the things that really kept popping out to me was you guys are a disruptor. Our company, Brave Work, like we're literally every day waking up going, where is a big problem in the world and how do we step into it bravely through story, through resources, through just many means of agitating the market.
Yeah.
And that so it resonates with us as a whole, as a family, as a team, as a company. How does it feel for you guys to be in this? Do your employees wake up every day going like, we are disrupting the system, like we're raging against the machine? I kind of picture them listening to like some old rock band on the way into work. I don't know. This is just my imagination, but yeah, do you guys feel like we're pushing a new way? I know some of this is like historically your model and all those things. There's people who've tried things and maybe had a little success, but you're certainly iterating on something in the 21st century that is a massive need, massive problem. Talk a little bit about the problem you're solving and then why being a disruptor feels good, because I'm sure it does feel good. It better feel good or you wouldn't be doing the work.
It definitely does. I think as I think about the problem we're trying to solve, I think about it in two ways. One is the healthcare system financially is unsustainable.
Yeah.
Right? Medicare trust fund's going to go bankrupt. And so we need a new model. That's a massive problem that we're trying to solve, right?
Wow.
There's $1 trillion a year in Medicare spend, which is a massive number.
Jeez.
And that's just Medicare. It doesn't include Medicaid, commercial. It's multiples of that number if you look at sort of total healthcare spend across the entire country. That's a very big, audacious goal that we're going after with that. The flip side of that is the foundation of that is, a patient. Right. It's every single patient who needs care, and we're trying to make an impact on their life. Think about a time where, and every single person has had this. Could be their a loved one, it could be them, could be a friend. But being sick is a very vulnerable time.
Yeah.
And I think that experience is something that, at least for me, and I think for everyone who works at Wellvana, is something that we want to get to the core of. How do we make that a better experience for that patient? Help them navigate the system, in a better way, but also help them on the front end of that be healthier, right? And be rewarded for that at the same time, right? So doctors should be paid for keeping patients healthy, not the other way around, right? Not being paid when someone's sick and they show up to the hospital to get treated effectively. And so that's the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve for, is how do we align healthy outcomes of patients to the financial incentives for providers and for payers at the same time, and everybody sort of wins in that equation. And I think the second part of that is really at the mission of why we're doing what we're doing effectively. Certainly, you've got this big audacious goal that we're going after to solve all of Medicare, but the way we do that is truly one patient at a time.
That's good.
The disruption side of that, I think, is just fun. And for me, and I think I mentioned this before, but I lost my dad a few years back. He was 62, had a heart attack. And I always knew throughout my career that I wanted to start something. I wanted to take a risk. I didn't want to look back when I'm sitting on my deathbed and say, man, I really should have gone after that. And I never sort of did it. Right. And up until this point, I think the experiences that I have gotten throughout my career sort of laid the foundation where I couldn't do what I'm doing now 10 years ago. I couldn't have done it out of school. It was really sort of the experiences that I've gone through and what I've learned, be it education, be it real life, be it, work, whatever it might be, that allowed for this opportunity to come in and focus on that. But, all that said, that event for me was also a time where I kind of said, I'm at a point in my life where if I don't take risk, I'm going to regret it. and it might not end well, but it could end incredible. And I'd rather, know that looking back on it, I took the risk. And I think the disruption is a key part in that, right? When you're at a startup company, effectively, you've got to solve key problems around access, convenience, cost. That's applicable to any startup anywhere in the entire world. There's an industry, and generally those three problems are going to be prevalent across that industry. And so how do we create a new model that solves those problems, which is thereby sort of disrupting the status quo within the industry?
I love it, man. I love it. It's so needed. I guess my curiosity when I listen and, you talk about risk, I think that's something our company's called Brave Work, right? Like I think about risk, and going into this year, at the beginning, every year I try to have some sort of through line, what is this? Where do I need to focus on? Where did I suck? Usually it's what did I suck at last year and how can I improve? In the year before, I really struggled to calculate my risk. And so I came up with this phrase for this year, which was risk in the right direction. And so you don't have to know what the bullseye is, but you better freaking be going in the right direction at the very least, somewhere down the right path ish, just close. How have you found leading this company? Hey, we're going to risk in this direction. We're going to move. Have you had to chart path where you're like, I don't know about this and I don't have the final answer, but I think we need to go that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's my entire job in many ways, right? Which is, make a decision with the data that we have. I know it's going to be wrong. It's just magnitude and direction, and then at that point in time, use data and make another decision.
Wow.
I think the worst thing we can do is not make a decision, right? It's just culturally is ruinous for morale, brings everything to a halt, and you're never going to know if it was directionally right or directionally wrong. And so that's a big part, I think, of the success that we've had to date, is the ability to push the culture to say, day by day, whether it's a very small decision or a very big decision, use the data we have, make a decision, move forward, and tomorrow let's make another one and do that again the next day after that.
This is fascinating though. Like I can listen as somebody, as your friend right now, and somebody who admires your work and be like, yeah, like that makes sense. But I'm also listening from the perspective of I had so many faces just pop in my head when you're talking of people who are like, wait, so fear is just like in the thing? It's just like in your soup all the time? Like, yeah. Fear, failure, all of it, like being
every day, all day.
So talk about that for a minute, because there's a lot of people, my sister listens to the podcast a lot. She's in Savannah, Georgia. Love you, Tiana. She called me this morning. She asked me to take her kids in the event that something ever happened to her. She's like, we're doing our living will. So that's my life, guys. That's what I got going on in my life, Oscar. She's like, will you take my two boys? And I'm like, hi, good morning. How's your day going? But she's a PA. Yeah. And she runs a large hospital and all the scheduling for the doctors and in Savannah, Georgia. And I was asking her about Wellvana and just, the nature of what you guys are doing. And she's like, it's so needed. Like this is a problem that needs to be solved. And it isn't sustainable the way the system is set up right now. I think that's true in a lot of spaces and just so many globally, but especially in the West. There's so many things that we've done that were built on speed, and speed doesn't always equal care and thinking about the cost in the long game. It's like, who's the fastest to get to the moon? It's like that cost us a crap ton of money just so we could beat the Russians. You know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of in the fabric of the West. And in some ways that's awesome because it pushes us to do things first. I just don't know that first is always the most sustainable for our children and for our children's children and for legacy. So as I think about somebody who's like, failure, every day, that's just baked into the soup. And not only is it baked into the soup for you, you're the guy that it all sort of falls back on at the end of the day. How did you get comfortable with just like, gonna fail today is part of the deal?
Look, I really think it goes back to the experiences that I've been in and the experiences that I've had, right? So I mentioned the hockey story. There's countless others like that where it did not go in my favor, and I'm still here. I'm still doing fine. I'm still moving forward.
Still eating chocolate cake,
if anyways, better than ever. And so I think that is a key part of it. It's knowing that regardless of what happens, like I'm going to be fine. And, you know, I'm going to move forward and, you know, make the best decision you can with the data you have effectively. And so
that's good.
You got to have the stomach for that. And I think that comes with experience. It also comes with, going back to what I said before, you know, you can't worry about it. If you, you know, let the headspace be filled with the worry about what's going to happen, you're going to be in a very bad place.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not going to be able to make any decisions. You'll sort of spin in cycles about what could happen. And
do I ever do that?
You've got to, you know, the preparation around that is good. But for me, that feeling pushes me into action. Right. So it starts with, you know, torturing my body with insane workouts so that I can clear my head and get rid of that over a temporary period of time, so that when those difficult things show up throughout the day, you know, I've already had one crazy experience. I know I'll overcome another, right? Starting with that workout in the morning. But it forces, for me, action. Like when I get that feeling of worry, it's like, well, what can I do about it? If I can do something about it, take that action now. And if I can't, then
let it go.
Let it go.
That's so good. I got a friend, I don't know if you know Harris the third, but amazing dude, amazing storyteller. And he says, worry is a misuse of the imagination. And I realized, like, everything I worry about, and yoga has taught me this as well, everything I worry about is just clouds passing. Like, it's like, yeah, it's real. It's a cloud. It's going to pass. Like, even death. Even losing friends and family members. And I mean, the hardest, ugliest parts of life, like, yes, they're severe, and yes, they suck. And yes, they shouldn't be minimized or diminished, or you should feel them. You should cry. You should feel, you should process, but it's a cloud and it will pass. And I think that's baked into your leadership style, which I love. I think it's important.
And you got to use those feelings, right? It's there for a reason.
Yes.
But I think you got to turn that into positive energy and do something about it. So for me, it really pushes me to, you know, plan and think through different scenarios, but do it in a constructive way through preparation, not kind of worry.
That's so good, man. What are some performance indicators for you guys right now as a team, as a company, some benchmarks of, like, how are we, in simple words, like, how are we defining success right now as a company, as a disruptor? Is it we're disruptors and that's where we're hanging our hat? Or is there kind of a clear, like, this is what it means for us to bring meaning into the world?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's very clear, but can always be clearer. You know, I don't think there's, you know, any company who's over communicated sort of what those goals are to all team members, because, you know, and we probably have the same problem, right? We think we communicate a lot, but it can always be more. And so we're always trying to push those out to the teams. But that starts with certainly a very top-down view of what are the objectives of the company and what are the key results that we're going to measure those by, something called OKRs, which a lot of big companies have used out there. But it's tying that back to individual sort of team member goals that they're going to be able to achieve that will allow us to achieve those goals as an entire company. So if it's around preventing a hospital admission, right, as a good example, we've got targets around, you know, how much we want to lower those by. And then different team members will have exact goals that will allow us to achieve that big goal based on the actions that they're taking. And I think that connection is critical so that everyone really understands why they're doing what they're doing.
That's right.
Which will allow all of us to be successful.
That's good. So give us, like, I would, in my world, I would call it the street version, but, you know, we get on a plane, we're sitting up there in cozy first class. We're eating, I don't know, what do you eat on almonds? Like, I don't know, like something that people tell us is healthy. And we do the banter, right? Like, hey man, what do you do? Hey, oh, what do you do? That's cool. That's, you know, where do you live? Oh, okay, cool. How do you explain to, like, the common dude like me in first class who probably shouldn't be there, I just fly too much, this is what we do? Like, this is, in simple terms, this is what we're doing. This is what our company's about. Because I know it's when I even listened to it with you and Jamie on the podcast, I was like, I get it. Like, you're from my perspective, it's like you're working with PCPs, trying to fundamentally change how they do business, getting them back to what they probably got into school for in the first place, people, and helping them stay healthy. Not get healthy from being sick, but actually just stay healthy and live a vibrant life. But the medical world is big business. Drugs are big business, like arguably the biggest in our country. And so how do you explain just like, hey, this is what we do. This is what we're about. This is what's going on.
Yeah, I think it depends on who I'm talking to.
Okay.
If, being in Nashville, there's a pretty deep understanding of the healthcare community here.
Yeah.
And so I usually would start with some form of question around that. How familiar are you with the healthcare space? And I think that answer tells me the direction as to how deep I go effectively.
Got it.
So if someone says, not at all, then I'd probably say I work in healthcare or something like that.
Keep it real general.
Extremely high level.
Yeah.
But the more familiarity that's there, the more granularity I would give around that. But I think at the core of it is exactly like you described, right? The healthcare system in America is not designed for health. It's designed for care, right? And I actually believe we give some of the best care in the entire world, right? If you're sick, you're going to show up and have incredible access to care and, have the most innovative procedures in the entire world. But there's no incentives, and the system is not designed to keep people healthy. And that's where our business model comes in, right? Which is we're helping healthcare providers, we're helping payers, we're helping patients transition that model where they are incentivized and reimbursed and paid for being healthy. And that could take shape in many different forms as to what that actually looks like.
Right.
But at the core of it, we're aligning those incentives across payers, physicians, primarily primary care providers and hospital systems, and driving that through healthy outcomes of patients.
Wow. It's so funny because I hear you say it and I'm like, yeah, that just seems so obvious. We should want people to be well, but why is that such a disruptive in our world today? Why is that so
hard, right? I mean, the system, there's several $1 trillion of healthcare spend a year. And so it's not something we can just shift overnight. And the system, take a primary care provider as a good example, right? They've been paid for taking an action, treating a sick patient for, decades, right? And even longer than that. Changing that behavior to say, we actually want you to flip that around and focus on not how many patients you can see within a day that are sick, but how do we keep patients healthy to begin with, is a very, very different way of thinking. And so that's not something that's going to change overnight. But we also have to figure out the incentives within that as well, right? So an insurer couldn't say to a physician that has a couple hundred patients, I'm going to give you the cost associated with those patients for the year. You manage them. If it costs you less, then you make money. If it costs you more, then you lose money. The math just doesn't work on that, right? They could have one patient who gets really sick, and now suddenly the physician loses a ton of money. And that's where models like Wellvana come in, is that as we group a lot of these physicians together, we can take that risk across hundreds of thousands of lives, which allows the payers to push that risk onto others, incentivize providers to get to the right behavior, and then they get a share in the savings that are created from that. But it's very, very difficult to do that on a physician by physician basis, just because the math effectively doesn't work behind that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So is some of the philosophy, and I could be totally off here, but is some of the philosophy like, man, if we can incentivize from a financial standpoint, because at the end of the day, like these are doctors, they have to pay their student loans back. They got family and kids. They're caring for people in their lives usually. Is the idea is like, if we can incentivize it, we can effectively bend the philosophy over time. Like if we can get the model right, then the behavior will sort of follow. Which is really interesting because if you think of it in terms of like parenting, right? You kind of do this in parenting. Like we do the same thing. It's like, okay, like, hey, if you do this, then there's a reward. And if you focus on your homework, then you get to watch TV for 20 minutes or whatever. Is it kind of the similar? I hate to make it that simple, but I'm a simple dude. So is that what we're doing?
At the core of it, it's about behavior change. Absolutely. For physicians, for patients, if we can't drive a change in behavior, then we're never going to be successful at doing that. How do we do that? We effectively go to the payer and we say, we've got 100,000 patients. You tell us what you think that those patients are going to cost for the year, and just give us that money. give it all to us, and allow us to manage that population. And if we can make them healthier, then we'll keep those savings and we'll share in the savings with the doctors. And if we can't, and if it costs us more, then we lose money, and we have to pay that back to the payer. We do that by driving behavior change. So there's 5 to 10% of patients that are going to be 70% of spend. Right? These are diabetes, COPD, CHF, oncology, MSK, musculoskeletal, orthopedics. But it's a relatively small percentage of patients that are going to be the vast majority of spend. And so it starts with identifying who are those patients, which we have a variety of sort of risk models that allow that to happen. And then it moves to, well, how do we intervene, right? How do we engage with that patient to get them to be healthier? And so that could be outreach through mail, through email, through text, through phone, through the physician directly, and get that patient to engage in our programs so that we can drive, better behaviors, getting treatments done at the right side of care that we can help them navigate, that are going to give them a better outcome, higher quality, lower cost, and really wrapping sort of a lot of services for that patient to get better access to care, get a better experience, better outcomes as a result of that, and do it at a better cost.
It's fascinating to me, man, because and this is one of my takeaways as I'm listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm listening and I'm going, in order to disrupt a space, you have to know the behaviors of that space. The like, what is true currently right now about this space? Where are we wanting to take this space, this domain? And what is the process? What is the customer journey? What is the experience? And you have behaviors almost on every level. It feels like you have to disrupt, which is the hardest part. Like if it was a product, like we'll just make a product and do a thing and then everybody's in, if it was like, we'll just hold a conference and get all the PCPs there. And like one day, I don't know, hypothetically,
it's
say
super,
a thing and they're in.
It is super messy.
Wow.
Technology in healthcare does not work well. So it's not, it's not like we can go to a doctor and say, here's a technology, use it. You suddenly do better.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And so it is a, technology-enabled services approach where technology helps, but there's a lot of people that need to change behaviors and workflows, and technology is a core part of that, but it is very difficult sort of day in and day out to drive that behavior change across payers, patients, providers.
What's the primary, as I listen, like the question I think of is like, what's the primary driver right now for lack of a better word, converting a PCP into a new philosophy, a whole new situation? Like, is there a technique you guys are using? I don't know if you feel open enough to share that, or a philosophy around it.
So we've got a pretty large, sales team that sort of leads that effort for us effectively. We have some physicians that have been with, similar groups where they haven't seen the results that they expected to see. So that would be sort of a different sales process than someone who has just never done value-based care at all. And we're selling sort of, differently between those two. But the approach that we use to sort of navigate that sales process, is very much sort of a gate-driven process. So imagine you've got a scale from 0 to 4. 0 is a brand new lead. 4 is a closed deal. And within there, you've got 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 1, 1.1, 1.2. And you can't progress to the next gate until you've passed the prior gate.
Wow.
And the probability of winning that deal goes up as you move up through those gates. But if you haven't closed those gates, you're not going to be at that higher probability. And so we have all kinds of actions that need to be taken, call to action as we call it, that the sales team has to follow so that we can ensure success. And so it starts with, well, how many leads do we have in the pipeline? And based on that lead, how many do we project will make it to the next phase and the next phase and so on and so forth. So it's a very, I would say, data-driven sales and marketing process that we use. It's similar to a Miller-Hyman approach, if you've ever heard of Miller-Hyman, for how we drive sales leads. But it's not it's not an art-driven sales process. It's very much sort of a scientifically driven process where we're training our reps on what is the next best sort of call to action that we need done that's going to move us farther along in that spectrum to the right to get the deal closed.
That's awesome. What is we're going to kind of wind down over the next 5-6 minutes, but what does some success look like for you guys? I mean, even financially, just you can brag for a minute, wherever you feel, confident to do so, obviously, but has there been some success that you're like, man, I'm really proud of our team. I'm really proud of what we've done so far in this space over X amount of time? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, I always get hesitant to sort of celebrate too much of the successes.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
But I think we've accomplished a lot in a very short period of time, and we've got to continue to do that. I'm more of a guy that hates to lose versus sort of liking to win. But if you look at the results, we think about it in terms of total medical spend, which is effectively our revenue, right, in many ways. And so if you go back a couple years, we had a few $1 million in medical spend under management. We'll have north of $2 billion next year. And so that growth, which is effectively our revenue, a few $1 million to $2 billion over a 24-month period, I think is certainly something for the team to recognize and celebrate and be happy about. I would say more importantly than that, that's driven because we've produced better results for the patients that are part of that, for the physicians that are part of that. If we didn't have those results, the top line growth certainly wouldn't be there. And so, if you look underneath that medical spend, what's actually there, it's tens of thousands of patients that we're impacting that are spending the night in their home and not in a emergency department room or admitted into a hospital or dealing with some other health complication because of the work that we're doing day in and day out. And so the work around that is life-changing for real patients and real people and their families day in and day out.
I love that, man. I want to close kind of as we wrap up with a few questions, a couple thoughts that are brewing in my mind right now. You guys obviously have done some amazing stuff. I love the fact that you just said I'm more of a person who just hates to lose than loves to win, because I've always described myself as like, I don't feel it's strange. Like I never felt very competitive in sports in the sense of like, I always felt like if I show up as my full self and I bring my game and you beat me, then I tip my hat. I'm good. But I hated the feeling of losing when I knew I could have won.
Yep.
I don't like that feeling.
Yep.
But then I would win, and it wasn't really ever about a win for me. Like It was like, okay, next. Like, what's the next mountain to climb?
I mean, I say this all the time, and we should expect to win, right? And we should expect to win because we know we're going to. Maybe not on this time, but on the next one we certainly will.
Yeah.
And I think that mentality definitely comes from sports growing up and look, we won a lot. We won the national championship every year growing up in sports. And so
it's crazy.
The expectation was we're going to win.
Yeah.
And if we ever lost a game, it was just, gut wrenching for sure. But I feel the same way at work sort of day in and day out. I mean, I think part of the drive is just not wanting to lose, right? In many ways versus, the feeling that you get when you win, it'll be gone tomorrow.
Yeah, quickly.
But you're going to remember those losses for sure.
Oh boy, don't I remember the losses. I got so many losses. Go ahead. You're good.
The people are here.
Okay, sweet.
You want me to just
let them do their thing?
Cool.
Thanks, bro.
Yeah, shut the door.
No, you're good, man. Thank you.
Cool.
Got some appliances getting dropped.
Oh, nice.
I could sign off on stuff.
Sign away.
Okay.
You look like a Pedro. Tough crowd. So I would love to wind down a little bit, just, two pervasive thoughts, and then we can kind of close with some final thoughts. But number one is, and it kind of goes back to your personal life, your personal story is, was there a moment in your history when you look back now that maybe you haven't even thought of this, but was there a moment where you go, I think that's why I do what I do? Like, is there something you can look back to now, whether it's childhood or along the way? Because we're talking a lot about the iterations that built you, but was there like a sort of antagonistic moment of like, your dad was a paramedic, which I can't help think but make that connection of like, was there something you saw as brave and beautiful in his work that maybe now has been just in there that moved you into this space you're in? Maybe unknowingly, maybe sort of in the background.
Man, tough question. I don't think it's one I don't think there's one event where something happened and it's just kind of, this is why I do what I do. I think it's a lifetime of events that sort of build on each other, right, in many ways. And you know, that starts with being pushed in sports when you're young, to learning how to have that drive for yourself over time. I think there's certainly a drive by wanting to continue to do better for you know, my family and those around me. And I think the opportunity you know, for that, I think is massive. The responsibility to others, the team, our investors, right? Everyone who's in and around the company. I think it's also comes from the wins, though, right? I mean, we had I was CFO at a company that had one of the biggest healthcare IPOs of the decade. Sold another company before that and had a successful exit there. And I think, you know, those are feelings when you go through them that it's like, yeah, this is great. I think you quickly realize shortly after that where, you know, that feeling sort of passes. And so, yeah, I think the drive comes from, you know, all the sort of losses or learnings, but also from those wins as well. Because I think you quickly realize that the joy in it is being in the adventure. It's being in the game. It's you know, using the skills that have taken a lifetime to develop and putting them to you know, good work. Wanted to be a role model for the kids and you know, enjoying sort of the game that this all is in many ways.
Yeah. It's funny. That's where I wanted to end. I wanted to end around your kids, around your family. You know, I don't know how much you know about my early life, and I won't give you the whole rundown, trust me. But in a lot of ways, my focus in life has always been to be a great father, more than anything else. And so really work and money and all of those things are tools that I trade or trophies I trade out for more time. Like I'm trying to get more time with my babies because you only get a short time. Like we get short time to be parents. One, and it's a kind of a couple questions within it, but what do you want your kids to remember about you? Like you're building freaking significant stuff. Like you got cranes flying everywhere, you know, and you do. Like if you were a building right now, we'd just be seeing cranes and painters and the designers and like
some smashing into each other.
Yeah, janitors. Like it'd be like everybody like, what are we doing? I don't know. So I think about that and I'm like, you know, there's going to be a day and, you know, my dad has sobered me up to this a lot with some of his health challenges recently. And, you know, we were sitting in the hospital recently and we had what could have been, thank God it wasn't, but a final conversation. You know, he had brain tumors and he's got stage 4 bone cancer and he's way outlived his time. And, it's been beautiful. It's been restorative in so many ways for me. But sitting in that hospital room as he's like, hey son, these are all the things I wish I would have said and I need to say. And he kind of ping ponged around. It was so good. It was life-giving, you know? Then I started thinking I'm leaving. I'm like, whoa, what is like my kids are probably going to be, hopefully if I've done it right, they're going to be the only ones there in the end. And all the cranes will stop one day, right? Like all the accolades, all these conversations, there'll be messages in a bottle for them to go back on. So one day your kids find this conversation, right? And they're like, what was dad wearing? That's the first thing. What's up with his hair? You know, it'll just be something, right? Right now we feel great, but then it's going to be like, oh God, I don't know. I didn't have a good barber in Nashville. Like, what do you want them to remember about your efforts around work and ultimately your efforts for them? And I'll say this as I give you that question. I've gotten to watch you know, just watch our kids play baseball together, right? I've been blown away by how, one, successful you are, but I've almost seen you at every practice. I've seen you at almost every game, maybe every. That's massive. Not even just there. Like sometimes you have to take a quick call, do a thing, but I see your fight to even be present while you're there in the stands. Like you ain't coaching, like that says more to me than the cranes and all the things you're building. Right. How yeah, just what do you want your kids to remember about your fight to be a present father in the midst of like, I also want to give you a better life in the future.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things as men, I feel there's a constant freaking war happening between me being present and me making money in my prime. I don't get my prime back. There's going to be a day where my body can't function the way it does now. 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 10 minutes from now, it's going to feel different. I'm getting older. So how do you fight for presence in the midst of all this and looking them in the eyes and tell them, hey, daddy loves you. I'm proud of you. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Man, that's a good question.
It's hard.
It's hard, and you can't do it without the right support network. And so I know for a fact I couldn't do what I do without my wife and the partnership that we have and the team we have together.
I love that.
It just wouldn't, it would never work. And so I've never really thought about that. I think for me, just being present is a key part of that. I struggle, especially in sports, not to push them and coach them, and so just kind of being there and saying good job. And
well, you do a lot better than most of the dads I see out there.
Maybe like one or two little pointers here and there that I just can't contain myself with, but I struggle with that, and I think
same.
I think every kid in our generation probably had a different experience with sports growing up. It was just kind of the times that it was in many ways. And so I try and do that through just being present.
That's good.
For me, I don't, whatever they kind of think they think, at the end of the day, I don't put too much into, obviously I want them to like me and have a great relationship. And, at the same time, I want to do what's best for them, not necessarily sort of be their friend. And I think that's an important distinction in many ways. And so if they look back on, things that I did, hopefully they look at it in a positive way.
Sure.
And hopefully there's a lot there that, whether it's opportunity or financially or experience or just being present, that they can take away from that. But I do all of that to make them better people, give them the opportunities that they want to have, whatever that means. And, as long as they, come out good on the other side of that, that's what I care about the most, I would say, in many ways, that less about what they sort of think about how I did that on the other side is kind of how I think about it, at least. But I do think there was I forget who it was. I was watching a podcast a few weeks back, and it was, some billionaire CEO, and he said the true definition of success is not, financial or business success or anything. It's, when your kids are in college, are they coming back home to see you? And that was something that I found really deeply meaning to me, right? I think about sort of our kids in 10 years or 15 years, and, they're off. Are they coming back home to, see their parents? And that was his view of the true definition of success. I love that.
I think that's brave, and it's a simple aspirational goal to go, like, I tell my wife all the time, she's like, what is success with our kids? And I say, I want them to call me on their hard days. I want to be the first phone call when life sucks and they're ready to throw in the towel. And I just want to listen.
Yeah.
I don't want to fix them. I don't want to tell them what to do. They can ask for advice. I'll give them feedback if they want it. But I just want to be the phone call because that tells me everything about, what I've done, how I showed up. And that's a way in my life I can look back and measure what mattered, what is meaning in just very simple terms. And I think in a lot of ways I've seen you do that I see you and hear you doing that with Wellvana. I see you doing that in your parenting. And it's crazy how much of our life experience becomes transferable in so many different spaces as parents, as CEOs, as leaders.
I love that. I would add one thing to that as well, which is ensuring that we've given them the skill set to be able to navigate that problem.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a big thing for me, is making sure they've got the experiences and the opportunities and the development, whether that's through academics or sports or whatever it is, to know how to navigate those problems.
That's really good. Equipping them with the tools so they can do it and think about it and process it. That's stinking amazing. Man, I'm really excited for Wellvana. I'm excited for the future of the company and where it's going to go and what it's going to do, and more disruption in the world. Thank you for sharing the highs and the lows, and even just some of the behind the scenes habits that you've And Kurt, we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time.
We did. I love it.
I'm really thankful for that. I know our tribe will be really thankful for that. Is any takeaways, like, or kind of like last thoughts of just leadership, things that have settled in you recently, books that have kind of hit you recently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big reader, so I'm always reading different.
Yeah, you were what are you reading? Was it Elon Musk recently?
His most recent biography. Yeah, I was reading that one. I mean, that's a fascinating.
It is fascinating. He is just he is the whole situation.
Different level. Different level.
He's a different dude.
No, I mean, look, I read a ton of different stuff. I think I would go back to kind of where we started in many ways. I think, at different points throughout my career, and I talked about sort of the vulnerability at the start to build trust amongst teams and what that sort of means. I think that's important on the other side of that as well, right? Is having the vulnerability to approach leaders that you might not otherwise do, ask questions, be present, listen. Mm-hmm. From a developmental standpoint, I think is a critical skill set to be able to learn, right? The worst thing you can do is have a question and not ask it. And I don't think anyone's going to sit there and say, man, that was a stupid question, right? I mean, and you'd be amazed. You might think that, but nobody ever really responds that way or even thinks that, because other people in the room are probably thinking that as well.
That's right.
I think that's a critical skill set to develop. And again, that starts with vulnerability and being willing to, having the confidence to do that or whatever it might be, is a critical sort of area for me, just to kind of round out where we started.
That's really good. Full circle. You did it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you just did that, but it was perfect. I don't even need to do anything now. Kyle, thanks for being on, man. I appreciate
it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Cheering you guys on.
Thank you.
Room to grow.